Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Maximize Apple Harvest Management and Maintain Post-Harvest Fruit Quality, presented by Valent USA, which develops and markets products that advance sustainable agriculture, protect crops, enhance crop yields, and improve food quality. I'm Larry Elwood, the custom content editor for Meister Media Worldwide, the publisher of American Fruit Grower magazine, and I'll be moderating the webinar. In today's webinar, you will learn how to use Valent's Retain Plant Growth Regulator for drop control to enhance your harvest management program. You will also learn how Retain can maintain fruit firmness and reduce odors like stem bowl cracking, water core, skin greasiness, and stem and flesh browning, so you can maximize your pack out and crop marketability this season. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our three speakers. First is Joseph Rasco, who is the Product Development Manager for Plant Growth Regulators at Valent USA. Based in Oregon, Joseph has a master's degree in plant protection and horticultural biotechnology from the University of Debrecen in Hungary. He received his doctorate degree in plant physiology and horticulture and crop science from the University of Tasmania in Australia. Joseph has worked for the Valent Group of companies for 11 years, including Valent USA, Mycorrhizal Applications, and Valent Biosciences. Also speaking today is Eric Ott, who has served in the role of Field Market Development Specialist for Valent USA for almost 15 years. Prior to his career at Valent, Ott was a researcher at Michigan State University. He earned both his bachelor's degree in agronomy and a master's degree in wheat science from Purdue University. And speaking is Greg Clark, a senior field market development specialist for Valent USA. He has a master's and doctorate degrees in plant pathology from Penn State University and has worked for the Valent Group of companies for 30 years. And now I'm going to turn it over to Greg to begin the webinar. Greg?
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate that. So we thought to set the stage for our discussion today, that it would be good to quickly review some of the common issues that are facing growers as you get closer to harvest. So in general categories, we can think first about harvest management. Fruit may be starting to drop prematurely. Maybe there are issues related to your labor supply, too few people to harvest your crop in a timely manner, causing you maybe to harvest some fruit too early, maybe some too late. Logistics related to equipment or other things may be an issue. And of course, weather can impact all of these. In the category of fruit quality, fruit, of course, at this time are maturing quickly. They're softening, they're developing maybe some of the typical senescent disorders that can occur. You may have certain varieties that are maturing unevenly, maybe due to sort of a multiple fruit setting period during bloom. And of course, weather can influence the rate of all of these issues too. Fruit size may also be a concern. Maybe thinning was difficult, like in many places this year, so you're carrying maybe heavy loads of fruit and are having some difficulty attaining size. Of course, some varieties are inherently small, so it would be good to have a strategy to maximize the potential for fruit size whenever you can. And then, of course, underlying nutrition and certainly drought can impact fruit size. And then finally, you're likely thinking ahead to where this fruit is destined after harvest, whether to immediate sale or into long-term storage. So you're thinking about how to best maintain fruit firmness and fruit quality, and how to reduce disorders like stem bowl cracking, water core, greasiness, skin bleeding, and other maturity-related disorders that can develop before harvest, but also have implications, of course, for storage of your fruit and how well it will pack out eventually. And then there are disorders that develop in storage itself, and you would want to minimize those whenever possible. So that's quite a list. And the purpose of this webinar is to talk about how Retain Plant Growth Regulator can be an important tool to help address many of these concerns. So we'll start today by having Joseph talk about Retain, what it is and how it works. Then I'll be back to discuss some of the pre-harvest benefits of Retain. Then our colleague Eric Ott will tell us more about how Retain affects post-harvest fruit quality. And then we'll be wrapping things up by reviewing how to use Retain along with some best practices so that you can get the most from it. And then we'll end with a Q&A period as Larry has described. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Joseph.
All right. Thank you, Greg. Well, let's see how Valent can help solving these issues, these pre-harvest and post-harvest issues that Greg just mentioned in the previous slide. So we do have a plant growth regulator product called Retain with the active ingredient AVG, which is a naturally occurring fermentation product. And AVG in Retain is known to block ethylene biosynthesis by inhibiting a key enzyme, ACC synthase. So since ethylene plays a major role in fruit maturation and ripening, pre-harvest application of Retain delays all these or most of these ripening-related processes like stem loosening, flesh softening, or the starch degradation. And as a result, the fruit hangs longer on the tree without the loss of quality. Now let's talk a little bit about ethylene. So ethylene is one of the main traditional 5 plant hormones, the auxins, the cytokinins, gibberellins, abscisic acid, and ethylene. And ethylene is unique in that sense that it is a gas. So it is synthesized naturally in the fruit, and it plays an important role in many physiological processes, like fruit ripening and maturation, flower senescence, fruit abscission. And at fruit maturation, it stimulates production of enzymes that break down cell walls in the abscission zone of the pedicel, which leads to fruit abscission or fruit drop. Now, this is, where Retain can be very useful by inhibiting or delaying these processes to aid harvest. And from physiological standpoint, the fruit can be harvested, at different levels of maturity. And, it could be early, it could be harvested too early, or it could be harvested too late. Neither of these are obviously desired from fruit quality or storability standpoint, and also from the standpoint that, they are susceptible to various fruit physiological disorders. So optimal harvest timing is therefore extremely important to achieve highest, fruit quality and the maximum grower return. And, obviously you want to have a nicely sized fruit with good color and the Brix level and the fruit that is firm with adequate starch. So certainly you don't want fruit drop as well. Now this is where, Retain comes in when you want to optimize your harvest. So there are times when, you need to delay fruit maturity and, extend the harvest window to provide more flexibility for labor management. So, if you just think about that, you have a 5-person crew to harvest a 10-acre block of, the same variety, sometimes because the harvest window is very short, it could be tricky or it could be difficult to, to go through the block, within the optimal fruit maturity or at the optimum, harvest time. So what you can do in this particular case that, just use Retain, apply it on part of the block and extend, the maturity, delay the maturity a little bit. So you could use the same number of harvest crew or the same number of people to harvest, the entire block. at different times. Also, Retain provides an extended drop control, so it helps reducing fruit abscission from the tree and maintains late-season fruit quality. It maintains post-harvest firmness and reduce storage disorders. And so these are the main benefits of the use of Retain. And what we will present you today, it will become evident that you can run your harvest. You can run the harvest on your schedule. And with that being said, I'll turn it over to Greg to talk about the details of the pre-harvest benefits of Retain.
Great. Thanks, Joseph. So just a note here about how this talk is organized. We'll sort of start each section by reviewing some of the problems that we had outlined up front. So we'll first look at harvest management, and you see here just a recitation of those issues that we talked about related to harvest management. And then we'll talk about how Retain provides some solutions to these. And then we'll provide some evidence to back up these claims. So we've already reviewed the issues and the problems associated with harvest management. And as Joseph even mentioned, we believe Retain is a good solution to some of these problems. It helps to hang fruit longer in the tree while maintaining fruit quality, reduces the quality disorders that we'll review in some detail here, things like water core, cracking, greasiness, and bleeding. Retain can be used in a variety of ways, and we'll get to that toward the end of the talk as we talk about how to use Retain. But just to set the stage here, you can use Retain in either one or two applications, and there are advantages for using a split application to continue to keep the ethylene production very low in the fruit, so that would be a case when you would want to use two applications versus one. So a two application use pattern can be very helpful to sort of heighten the effects of Retain. Also, to accomplish other goals, using a late application of Retain, maybe as close as 7 days before harvest, can help to have good impacts on fruit quality with less impact on fruit color. And we'll talk more about that as we go forward. And I do want to, at this point, just say this talk, we're really just scratching the surface for the uses of Retain on apples close to harvest. And so I just make a note here to point you to the Valent websites, and we have a really nice technical manual for Retain that will give you even more detail than what we're presenting here today, and also give you examples of how Retain is being used all over the world. So we won't get into too many of the nuances with the use patterns, but just want to point you to that resource if you have interest after seeing this webinar. All right, so moving on. So these are some of the ways in which we see Retain providing solutions to harvest management problems. Pre-harvest fruit drop, of course, is key among them, and these are some pictures from very early in the development of Retain, McIntosh in New England somewhere, and you can see that Retain has a dramatic effect in reducing pre-harvest fruit drop. This slide shows you some data looking at cumulative fruit drop. So each of those lines represents, the amount of fruit drop over time. You have time on the bottom axis there. And we're looking at the untreated trees. You can see how fruit are dropping there over time. And this is McIntosh, so classically a very high ethylene producing variety, and also one that's very prone to fruit drop. And we're comparing in those green bars either Retain at a single pouch at 21 days before harvest in the dotted line, or a split application. So two total pouches, first application starting at 21 days before harvest and then following up at 7 days before harvest. And you can see very clearly that Retain in one application is doing a great job in reducing fruit drop for this highly prone variety for this disorder. And then the 2 applications gives you even better control. So thinking about something like pick your own operations, you can see clearly the ability here to keep fruit on the tree for your customers deep into the harvest window. So this is very typical kind of response that we see with Retain. It's definitely a rate responsive sort of material. The more you use, the greater and longer these maturity delaying effects are, the reductions in fruit drop, etc. Here's an example on Honeycrisp. Now, Honeycrisp is doesn't drop as much, but can have problems there. And here we're looking at the percent fruit drop per tree, comparing the untreated to a single application of Retain, and then a combination of Retain and an NAA product like Pomaxa. And you can see Retain by itself is doing a great job in reducing pre-harvest fruit drop of Honeycrisp. And then in this case, the combination of Retain and Pomaxa is giving you a little incremental more control in fruit drop. And this kind of recipe using Retain along with an NAA product has been a good use pattern in some other varieties too, like Red Delicious and some other things. So that combines 2 products with different modes of action to manage pre-harvest fruit drop and can be a really good option in some situations. Here's an example of fruit drop, again, cumulative fruit drop in these bars, so lower bars are better over time. And here we're comparing 2 applications of Retain, and the variety here is Red Delicious, Oregon Spur, and another strain there. I can't quite read that. But so here we have Retain followed by Retain compared to Retain followed by Harvista, which is a sprayable 1-MCP product, and then compared to Harvista by itself. In this case, you can see, again, the double applications of Retain doing a great job in these green bars and keeping cumulative fruit drop to a minimum. We know that this is a common use pattern in some parts of the country, the Pacific Northwest in particular, where Retain is followed by Harvista. You can see the responses there. The relatively poor response of Harvista by itself is likely due to the fact that the timing of that product is much closer to harvest, and so these higher bars represent, the early fruit drop that really can't be controlled by that late application. But just illustrates how Retain can be used again in a double application sort of program, but also in programs with other materials. Now let's move on to the problem of variable fruit maturity and trying to maintain fruit quality. And here we feel that Retain offers some good solutions by maintaining, by delaying fruit maturity by controlling ethylene. And as Joseph has just talked about, ethylene or AVG in Retain is shutting down ethylene production in the fruit, and that's delaying maturity. It creates a more even ripening in the crop, and we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. And you see that most obviously in the starch conversions where you're doing starch index sorts of testing. That's where you'll see that. Retain offers this late application opportunity. So here using Retain at 7 days before harvest may not have much of an impact on the first pick of a multi-pick variety, but it will delay and improve the quality or maintain the quality of the second and third picks for quality, and being able to delay harvest in some seasons can also get you into some better color weather, so that can be an advantage as well. There is this, as I mentioned earlier, this split application opportunity that just highlights and helps to extend the effectiveness of Retain, and there are times when a split application is a good idea. And altogether, we believe, and we have data to demonstrate it, that Retain helps to deliver better quality fruit growing into storage. You have a better piece of fruit, it's firmer, it's lower producing of ethylene, and so it goes into storage in better shape, and as Eric will describe in a few minutes, holds up better in storage too. We're going to talk for a minute about retain and fruit color. As Joseph pointed out, ethylene is a key ripening hormone, and fruit color development is also affected by ethylene. So there are color responses after retain, and they differ very significantly by variety and by strains within a variety too. And these are just the simple facts, but we believe that there are ways to manage these responses, and one of the ways is to use timings closer to harvest, and I've been referring to that. So timings like 7 to 10 days before harvest compared to 21 to 28 days before harvest, which might be more typical. So these timings closer to harvest allow for natural color to develop before you apply retain for the harvest management goals that you have. And then the additional hang time that often results there can improve fruit color in those seasons when the harvest delay gets you into some cooler nights. So here's an example of where retain was applied to Honeycrisp 7 days before harvest, and you can see all the beautiful natural color has developed here, and this fruit then had really good drop control, really great management of fruit firmness and fruit quality. So there are ways to manage through this, and again, I'll point you to the Retain technical manual and other resources that we have that will talk more about this. Thinking again about the basic response to retain by apples, here we're looking at the percent of fruit that are producing over a critical amount of ethylene, called a climacteric amount of ethylene. So you can see untreated fruit here, 80% of the fruit are over this threshold of producing ethylene, and you can see retain greatly reducing the percent of the fruit that are generating that amount of ethylene. So this is just showing you the basic response of the fruit, as Joseph had said, in shutting down ethylene production. Here's an example from that same study too, where even at 7 days before harvest, you're having an impact in maintaining fruit firmness. So at harvest, just a slight improvement there from retain. But then the second set of bars to the right, this is 8 days of room temperature storage. And room temperature storage, of course, is like an acid test for maintenance of fruit quality and fruit firmness in particular. And so you can see here that the untreated fruit is falling off pretty dramatically, while the retain treated fruit is holding up well. So this all points to the power of reducing ethylene production and all of the things that cascade from that, the drop control that we've been talking about, and here the better maintenance of fruit firmness. Now let's talk about the problem of small fruit size, and reviewed earlier the components of that. Here we think retain can be very useful because it allows fruit to hang longer without losing quality. So the size gains there are pretty obvious just by being able to delay harvest. Fruit reportedly are, for most varieties in most cases, are growing at something like 1% a day. So just imagine how several days of harvest delay can result in increases in fruit size. Here again, the two application use pattern can be even more helpful to delay harvest and potentially improve fruit size. And again, these late season applications can also help in improving size and color. Here's an example of this. Now this slide takes a little bit to explain, so follow along with me. Here we're looking at the average fruit weight of these fruits. So the bars represent fruit weight in grams. And then at the bottom, you can see the use patterns for each one of these green bars. So you have retain applied at 1/4 of a pouch per acre, retain at 1 pouch per acre, The 1+1 means it was one of those split application programs at 30 and 7 days before harvest. And then the last bar there is 2 pouches applied all at once at 30 days. And then the number at the bottom, like this 5DAUTC, means that this fruit was harvested 5 days after the untreated, so after the black bar. And then going down the line, 19 days after, 30 days after, 22 days after. So these fruit, for the retain treated fruit, the green bars, this fruit was harvested at equivalent maturity, equivalent stages of maturity as the untreated. So it's just as the fruit are ready to pick, they were harvested, and this was work done at Michigan State by Phil Schwalier. So what you're seeing here is the impact of that delay in harvest on improving fruit weight. So you have the untreated fruit, 5 days of delay gives you a little bit more fruit size. 19 days, obviously a lot more fruit weight here. The 2 applications of retain, a 30-day delay, that's a massive increase in fruit size. So this is just a nice way to demonstrate that retain used in a variety of ways gives you harvest delays that then can result in larger fruit size. Let's think again about the effects of retain on maturity-related disorders, other problems that currently or that frequently pop up. So retain does a great job in reducing water core of Red Delicious, the cracking in Gala that can often be a problem, especially when you have remnants of hurricanes coming through roughly at the time when Gala begin to be ready for harvest. Retain can be a great tool to reduce the stem bowl cracking. Greasiness in Jonagold is also greatly reduced by retain. The internal bleeding that happens in Law Rome, very much reduced by retain. And some background color issues in some varieties also is helped by retain. So these are good and helpful responses that have implications for pack out and fruit quality later on. Now this is just a restatement of the effects of retain on water core, and we have found that retain is especially does a great job on Red Delicious in particular. It just about eliminates it entirely in Red Delicious. In Fuji, we have found overall that it reduces the severity of water core, but doesn't quite blanket out like it does in Red Delicious. But this is a strong effect of retain in reducing water core in Red Delicious. We've been mentioning all along that retain is delaying maturity, and you pick that up most easily by looking at starch conversion. So here we're looking at the starch index, a typical staining of fruit with an iodine solution. So here we have 2 different harvests for the untreated, and then a variety of ways in which to use retain. So here's retain at a half pouch at 21 days before harvest in that first bar. Then retain applied twice in that split application kind of method, 21 days and 7 days before harvest. And then finally retain at a full pouch at 7 days before harvest. You can see very clearly this nice reduction in the starch index, indicating a delay in maturity. Nothing like a picture to demonstrate something, and here's a nice set of pictures showing typical kind of difference between untreated fruit and retain treated fruit. There's a couple of things I want to point out here that are important. One is the obvious delay in maturity here on the retain side, but also note how variable the maturity is in the untreated set of fruit. You have some that are cleared out entirely, some others that still retain quite a bit of the black staining, compared to retain, the retain treated tray, where it's very uniform, very uniformly delayed. This has significant implications, for for fruit quality. You can imagine quite a bit of variability in firmness in the untreated set of fruit, whereas the retained treated fruit is all nicely uniform, so you would expect fruit firmness to be nicely uniform in that crop too. And this sort of uniformity is very helpful post-harvest if you're going to use 1-MCP technologies in storage. So it's been shown very early in the development of those 1-MCP technologies that variable lots of fruit, so sort of like the ones on the untreated side, result in a real differential response to the 1-MCP materials, whereas retained treated fruit, because it's a nice uniform target, they're already not producing much ethylene going into storage. They represent a very good target for the 1-MCP technologies, and the result is nice uniform responses to that and good maintenance of fruit quality in storage. So with that, I will turn it over to Eric Ott, who will describe in a little more detail some of the things we've found about the effects of retain on post-harvest quality. Eric?
Thank you, Greg. So as you've heard Greg and Joseph talk a little before about some of the things that go on with fruit, specifically apples, as the season progresses. But as soon as the apple is harvested, fruit quality naturally starts to decline, and retain helps maintain fruit firmness in the field as well as in storage, helps reduce stem and flesh browning in gala, as well as help maintain uniformity of maturity as it goes into long-term storage and is subsequently treated with other post-harvest treatments. So this is a busy slide, and we'll talk a little through this here. So one of the ways, as I mentioned earlier, retain helps with post-harvest quality is that it allows for fruit to maintain firmness after harvest. This graph shows data comparing gala fruit firmness across several different retain treatments. So to set things up, the y-axis, so we're measuring fruit firmness here in pounds of pressure. And the first of bars is the untreated, and then this going from left to right. The second is the retain at 1/2 pouch applied 21 days before the first harvest. The third is retain applied at 1/2 pouch 21 days before harvest, followed by another 1/2 pouch 7 days, retain applied 1/2 pouch 21 days before harvest, followed by another 1/2 pouch of retain 7 days before harvest. And then the fourth set of bars is retain applied 1 pouch 7 days before harvest. So within each set, the first bar going from left to right is fruit firmness at the first harvest. The second bar is fruit firmness measurements taken after being stored at room temperature for 7 days after the first harvest. The third bar is fruit firmness at the second harvest, and the fourth bar indicates fruit firmness measurements taken after being stored at room temperature for 7 days after the second harvest. So as Greg mentioned earlier, storing fruit at room temperature is the acid test on how well some of these treatments stand up in storage. And you'll notice that all of the treatments tend to drop after 7 days of being stored at room temperature. However, if you look at the retain treated fruit, so regardless of the retain program, fruits stay firmer over time as well as have less of a decrease in the fruit firmness compared to the untreated. This graph shows similar treatments but measuring fruit firmness 5 and 9 months after harvest. The bars on the left of all the treatments indicate fruit firmness after 5 months of storage, and the bars on the right indicate fruit firmness after 9 months of storage. While all the retained treatments did have greater fruit firmness than the untreated check in this trial, the retained one-half pouch applied 21 days before harvest, followed by one-half pouch applied 7 days before harvest, maintained fruit firmness best in this trial. Stem and flesh browning is a physiological disorder that can affect apples in storage, especially Gala. This graph shows similar treatments and storage times as the previous graph, this time showing data about stem and flesh browning. All retained treatments significantly reduced stem and flesh browning in treated apples, but the retained one-half pouch applied 21 days before harvest, followed by retained one-half pouch applied 7 days before harvest, provided the greatest protection against stem and flesh browning in storage. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Greg to discuss how to use retained PGR.
All right, thanks, Eric. So, we've tried to show you, I think, the various ways in which retain can be a useful tool in addressing many of the problems or issues that fruit growers are facing. So now let's talk about the practical nuts and bolts things about how to use retain. So as you can see here, there's sort of two different ways to think about the use of retain. One is for single pick varieties, and here you can apply 1 to 2 pouches of retain per acre at 21 to 28 days before the anticipated start of normal harvest, like for the untreated fruit. And you can go all the way up to 7 to 10 days before harvest. For multiple pick varieties, we find that this application closer to harvest, so a full pouch 7 to 14 days before harvest, can be really effective in helping to improve or maintain the quality of the second and third harvests of that fruit. So just graphically here, you've got a wide window in which to use retain. And I guess that's one of the points here about the current label for this product, is that it's very flexible. You've got 1 to 2 pouches per acre that can be used in this range from 28 days to 7 days before harvest. It's a 7-day PHI product. And then, as we've mentioned, this is a very rate responsive product too. So there's like infinite ways to use this product to tailor it to your own goals by, adjusting something about the rate or the timing to get to the objectives that you're interested in. So just some more details here. As I mentioned, 1 to 2 pouches per acre. It is packaged in a water-soluble pouch inside of a foil pouch. We recommend good water volumes, 100 gallons per acre, or enough volume to make sure that you're getting adequate coverage without runoff. This is very critical, so if you like to think in terms of like a 2x sort of volume, that's pretty ideal for the application of this product. Aerial applications may be made by a helicopter, and this is a special thing for Washington State, so that's an option for those growers. We do have notes about making sure you're using retain on healthy orchards. Don't apply to trees that are under serious stress, whether it's nutrient stress, water stress, or pest related stress. All of those things have effects on ethylene relations within the plant and things, and we try to, whoops, what happened there? There we go. So be sure you're applying to trees that are healthy. In terms of a surfactant, we do recommend the use of an organosilicone surfactant at 0.05 to 0.1% to improve uptake and coverage. And this is especially critical on high ethylene producing and drop prone varieties. And I'll mention here too, for sort of a best practices, is to apply early in the morning under really slow drying conditions. That really gives you the optimum sorts of uptake and response to retain. Probably the worst thing to do would be to apply this material, in the middle of the afternoon and heat of the day. Really take the time, apply this early in the morning or late at night when you have extended drying periods. You will be very pleased with the results there. As mentioned, here are the reentry intervals and the PHI for your reference. And in terms of rain fastness, we do recommend that you try to find an 8-hour period without rain to get the maximum impact here. So with that, Eric's going to walk you through a few more steps.
Yes, so a common tank mix partner in palm fruit for retain includes NAA products like Pomaxo when used for fruit drop management near harvest. Auxin-based products such as NAA, while good at reducing fruit drop, tend to also increase ethylene production. If an NAA product is used alone, advanced maturation and fruit softening can occur. NAA products like Pomaxo are a great combination with retain for fruit management as harvest approaches. So I know Greg's talked about some of the practices and things to consider earlier, but always good to go back through and discuss some of the specifics. So some of the best practices to consider while using retain include maintaining a solution pH between 6 and 8. As Greg mentioned earlier, the use of an organosilicone surfactant is critical, especially for drop-prone varieties. We want to have retain applied under slow drying conditions and cool fruit, which means early morning or late evenings are the best application timing. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, adding Pomaxo for extended fruit drop control is an excellent plan. Some conditions to avoid applying retain include stressed trees, whether that is due to nutrients, water, or pests, or environmental conditions. Retain will not work as well when the trees are stressed. And also avoid mixing with pesticides containing zinc, iron, or copper. Also, we do not want to tank mix with sunburn protectants like Raynox products. And some other, just to finish up with some of other things that retain can be used for in tree fruits include increasing fruit set in apples as well as cherries. Retain reduces ethylene production in these plants, which extends the viability of the bloom, allowing more opportunity for fruit set and therefore better crop load potential. Retain can also be used for harvest management in stone fruit crops. The optimal timing for retaining in stone fruit is right around the 10 to 14 days before harvest. And with that, I will now pass it back to Joseph.
All right, thank you, Eric. Well, I think Eric and Greg did an excellent job, explaining how retain works and how this product should be used. And it is a tall order to summarize everything on one slide, but let me give it a try. So from what was presented today, it is very clear that the main value of using retain is the ability to run the apple harvest on your schedule. So at the same time, maintain post-harvest fruit quality. And, this is what it makes this product is so unique, that with pre-harvest applications, you can get both the pre-harvest and the post-harvest benefits in apple harvest management. So Greg talked about the harvest management uses and how retain can spread the harvest over a wider window, by delaying the maturation and the ripening processes, so growers can maximize their labor. And we talked about the uniform fruit maturity and quality after retain applications. Retain inhibits ethylene production and also maintains the pre- and post-harvest fruit quality and reduces the disorders in storage for improved back out and marketability. We also talked about the fruit size benefits of applying retain, in certain varieties where the fruit size could be an issue, then retain can come in handy, in these situations, because at maturation or at the ripening stage, the fruit gains, 1% of its weight every single day. So just by delaying the harvest or the ripening processes, that allows the fruit to grow further and achieve a better fruit size. Besides the pre-harvest benefits, we talked about maintaining the post-harvest, fruit firmness, and also prevent storage disorders of the apple fruit after retain applications. So all of these benefits make retain a very valuable tool for harvest and post-harvest management uses in apple production. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Larry for questions.
Thank you, Joseph. Sorry there. My button wasn't working on coming back on so everybody could hear me. Great presentation. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We do have some questions. And Joseph, maybe we'll just start right with you, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Okay, sounds great. All right, Joseph. What new research exists for new or club apple varieties?
Okay, well, this is a great question. Actually, we have been looking at the testing of retain in new varieties like New York 1, Cosmic Crisp, Honeybee, or Mini-Esca varieties, where we don't really expect a whole lot of difference, but what we are looking at is the different benefits or the different uses of retain, because in certain varieties there are different issues that we have to deal with. For instance, we've been looking at the greasiness in Cosmic Crisp, where it could be an issue. Fruit size is not an issue. Cosmic Crisp is a good sizing variety. Also in Mini-Esca, the firmness or the fruit quality benefits, and post-harvest effects of retain. These are what we've been looking at, and so I cannot really generalize. But what I would recommend is keep an eye on the retain technical manual, because we are in the process of updating this manual with the new varieties. A lot of new useful information that you can find online, and we're gonna share all this information as soon as they are available.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. And again, just to our audience, a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, just go to the bottom pane there and fill out the bracket and send it in, and one of our speakers will answer it. And Greg, we have a question for you right now. How would you recommend I get started using retain for the first time?
Yeah, so I think the best way to get started is choose a variety that maybe you've got, too much of, too much to get through in a reasonable amount of time, and maybe split that block and treat half of it with one pouch of retain, and I would say maybe the 21 days before harvest would be a good idea. And start to get some experience with this product. It does take a while to kind of get used to the effects, get used to how it's going to perform under your conditions. But I would say, if you've got a variety, like I said, that you've got a little too much of, and it would be good to be able to space that out a little bit, starting with one pouch at about 21 days before harvest. Use the organosilicone, as we've talked about. Apply early in the morning, slow drying conditions, and I think you'll see that there'll be a significant delay in fruit maturity. You'll have good drop control in that block that you have treated, and start to get used to how you can use this tool. One of the things we haven't really talked about just because of time today, but there are some really creative ways to use retain. One is to use retain at various rates across a whole variety. So you can literally start with untreated fruit, pick it at its optimal timing, and then maybe you've used some partial rate, and that would be the next block of fruit that you begin to harvest, and you can harvest that at its optimum quality, and you can sort of ladder your way through a whole crop of one variety by using various rates, increasing rates of retain, to always be picking fruit at its optimum quality, sort of back to that slide that Joseph showed in the beginning where you don't want to be picking too early, you don't want to be picking too late. You want that fruit of the optimum quality in the middle. You want to pick that all the time, and retain is a good tool to start that.
Okay. Another question for you, Greg. What is it about organosilicone spreaders that makes retain work better?
We've found that it's a really good penetrant and a good spreading material. And early in the development of retain, we found that organosilicones were a step above sort of normal non-ionic surfactants, especially in varieties that are high ethylene producers and tend to drop a lot. So there's something about that chemistry, really good spreading activity. So we're recommending already pretty high spray volumes, 100 gallons of water per acre, but that organosilicone really moves that material around on the leaves and the abscission zone and the fruit surface, and also really helps to maximize the uptake of the active ingredient. So we've just found over time that the organosilicones are the best match for retain.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Eric, question for you. How should I use retain for U-pick apple operations?
That's a really great question, and Greg mentioned this earlier in the presentation, in that there seems to be an infinite number of ways you can use retain, and for the U-pick operations, you can tailor it to your marketing plan, and retain can allow you to extend the availability of your popular varieties over a longer period, using it closer to harvest, that 7 to 10 days before harvest. As I mentioned, you can help with fruit quality going into storage and reduce loss due to poor fruit quality as you continue to sell through the winter. I know I was talking with a grower in Ohio here this spring, and he was selling fruit that he harvested last fall, and it tasted good. And I asked him what he did, and he goes, I just common storage, and I used retain about 7 to 10 days before harvest, and it still has very good eating qualities. So yeah, you can tailor it to your own marketing plan.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Joseph, we have a question for you. I use retain in smaller than 1 acre applications. Does the soluble powder degrade when stored in an open pouch? Joseph?
Yes. So basically the label says that, once you open the outer metallized bag, the entire amount of retain has to be or must be used. So normally we wouldn't store the product, in smaller quantities. However, it's understandable that, sometimes, that happens, that you get some leftover material. In these situations, if the humidity or the relative humidity, in your shed or somewhere is high, yes, the bag can become brittle, over time. So in this particular case, you can use a Ziploc bag or, whatever similar, packaging material to store the product. But it is highly recommended to use up all the product once you open the original packaging.
Okay, thank you, Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
Greg, question for you, Greg. Could you address stem bowl cracking in Gala, equal timing, number of applications? I think this question didn't come through too well. Could you address stem bowl cracking in Gala apples? I think that's what you're saying.
Right,
Sorry
absolutely. Yeah, no, we know that Retain does a good job in reducing that stem bowl cracking. I would say in terms of the timing and rates and stuff, typical timing, so the 21 days before harvest definitely has an impact in reducing the stem bowl cracking. We have seen through some research done by Tom Kahn at NC State, he did some work there and showed that even applications as close as 1 week before harvest can have a significant impact in reducing the stem bowl cracking. So often that disorder is initiated by all of a sudden some heavy rains and things like that. So I will say though that it's not like if you see rain in your forecast, you know you're going to get dumped on by a hurricane remnant or some massive front. You can't put Retain on 24 hours before that and expect any effect of that to reduce the stem bowl cracking. But if you're using Retain sort of in normal ways, maybe at anywhere from 21 to 7 days before harvest, I think you'll be pleased with the reductions in stem bowl cracking. It is it's a maturity related thing. Gala, if you did a starch test vertically on Gala, you'll see this differentiation. The more mature at the top of the fruit on the shoulders than at the bottom. And so as you get close to harvest, that sets up some stresses, and then you get rain in this situation, and the additional turgor pressure just starts to blow things apart. But because Retain is evening out the maturity in the fruit, top to bottom as well as side to side, that's why you're having the positive impacts that you are with the product. So hopefully that got to the question there.
Yeah, great. No, very, very informative. Great answer. Thank you, Greg. Joseph, coming back to you, can I apply Retain in extreme temperature conditions?
Yes. So for harvest management standpoint, extreme temperature means very high temperatures, above 90 or 100 degrees. So the extreme cold is not an issue. But when you see an extreme high temperature front coming, you try to avoid a large dose of Retain applied all at once. In these situations, what is recommended is to apply, let's say, a split application. Apply half of the amount, or half a pound before, and once the high temperature period is over, applied again. So what the recommendation is, what I would recommend is to split the application and split the risk, in this particular situation, because we know that above 90 degrees, above 100 degrees, Retain has a reduced efficacy. So we try to avoid, applying only one shot, at the time of high temperature or temperature extremes.
Okay. Thank you, Joseph. And we have one final question. It's for you, Greg. Any specific recommendations for using Retain on pears?
Yeah, Retain is labeled for use on pears and has some good benefits similar to what we've been talking about in apples and reducing pre-harvest fruit drop, maintaining fruit firmness, etc. I would say look carefully at the label. The timing is a little bit different, more like 10 to 14 days before harvest seems to be a good timing for something like Bartlett pear. And also a significant difference from apples is that we would recommend Retain be used with a high quality spray oil rather than an organosilicone on pears. And this is just for pears. that seems to be the better combination, retain plus, a typical high quality summer weight oil. And but yeah, that can be very, very effective.
Okay, great. Thank you. We actually have a couple more questions that came in while you were answering that, and we have time here, so let's get them answered. Is there a minimum block size per application? And the person who wrote that said he had heard concerns about spot spraying varieties with retain or spraying smaller blocks and ethylene drifting into the retain treated trees and affecting maturity. Does anybody, Greg, maybe that sounds like it's up your alley.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've ever thought about it that way. I'm not sure what to think about that. I mean, you'd have to have a lot of ethylene chunking out of some nearby trees to overcome an application of retain. Yeah, I don't know that I've got a good answer for that. I have not seen that personally, but an interesting thing. Maybe let me give that some thought and maybe look around, and that person can maybe reach out to us directly somehow. I'd be interested to talk more about that.
Okay. Yeah, and we've got his email here too. So, okay. And we do have another question for you, Greg. Is it okay to leave retain in the tank overnight as a partial tank not sprayed?
Yeah, overnight, I would not be worried about that. I would get nervous after 24 hours, and I think that's typical of our internal testing. We look at that sort of thing, stability in mixtures. Joseph may have more information about that, but like I said, overnight, I would not have a concern. If you've got to do that, get it under cover. Make sure it's not like baking in the sun or anything like that. So I think if you just take good care, I wouldn't be worried about an overnight wait. Joseph, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree with you, Greg. I wouldn't really be concerned leaving retain in the tank for overnight by itself. Although if it's tank mixed with something, then I would try to avoid that. So if retain is, just by itself, I think that should be fine. I wouldn't see any issues with that.
Okay. Looks like we had one more come in. Joseph, for you. What is the optimum timing to prevent bleeding in RubyMac?
For internal bleeding, I would say 3-4 weeks is the best application timing. The earlier you apply, the better, because you can get ahead of the internal bleeding, so the development of anthocyanins or accumulation of anthocyanins in the flesh.
Okay.
So the earlier the better.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, well that about does it, gentlemen. Excellent presentation. Thank you. And a lot of good questions. I want to thank everybody for attending the webinar, and I want to thank Valent USA for presenting it. And thanks again to Joseph Rasco, Eric Ott, and Greg Clark for providing an excellent overview on the topic and answering those questions. So thanks once again for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and found it informative. Have a great day.